At 61, Melissa Gilbert reveals the shocking truth about Patty Duke. What if the woman America called Half Pint has been keeping one of Hollywood's most emotional secrets for decades? At 61, Melissa Gilbert finally breaks her silence, revealing the truth about Patty Duke, the legendary actress who shaped her life and haunted her in ways no one ever knew. The story you're about to hear isn't about fame. It's about survival, mentorship, and the cost of living under the bright lights of Hollywood. Because sometimes, the people who teach us the most are also the ones who show us how fragile we really are. If people really knew what went on behind the camera, they'd never watch TV the same way again. The words belong to Melissa Gilbert, the girl America once called Half Pint, the picture of innocence from Little House on the Prairie. But behind that sunshine smile was a child growing up in a world that could turn sweetness into strategy overnight. Born Melissa Ellen Gilbert on May 8, 1964 in Los Angeles, she never had a normal childhood. Adopted as an infant by actor-comedian Paul Gilbert and his wife Barbara Crane, her crib was practically surrounded by spotlights. Her bedtime stories weren't fairy tales. They were casting calls and studio gossip whispered in the next room. From day one, the entertainment business wasn't a dream. It was her reality. Everyone around her smiled. But Melissa quickly learned that Hollywood smiles don't always reach the eyes. Neighbors were producers. Family friends were sitcom stars. Everyone seemed successful until the doors closed. That's when she began noticing the cracks, the late-night arguments, the silence after the phone rang, the pain no one dared to mention. She saw people who were adored on screen and destroyed off it. And as she'd later admit, that early exposure to both glamour and chaos became her unofficial education. When other kids were learning multiplication, Melissa was learning how to cry on cue. When other little girls dreamed of movie stars, she was one. Or at least she was being built into one. What nobody told her was that being America's sweetheart often comes with a secret rule. You don't get to make mistakes where anyone can see them. This would follow her through every phase of her career. And it would make her bond, and later her heartbreak, over Patty Duke so much more profound. Because when Melissa finally told the truth about what she saw, it didn't just change how fans remembered Patty Duke, it changed how they saw Melissa Gilbert herself. By the early 1970s, Hollywood was obsessed with finding the perfect child actress, the next face that America could fall in love with. Enter Melissa Gilbert, 9 years old, freckled and disarmingly real. She walked into an audition for a new frontier drama called Little House on the Prairie, based on the books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. It was a room filled with children rehearsed to perfection, each one smiling just a little too hard. But when Michael Landon looked up from his script and saw Melissa, something changed. She wasn't polished, she wasn't pretending, she just was. That authenticity landed her the role of Laura Ingalls Wilder, the spirited pioneer girl who would soon become the beating heart of one of television's most beloved shows. From 1974 to 1983, Little House dominated living rooms across America. Families gathered to watch the Ingalls family struggle, pray, and love through the toughest of times. And at the center of it all was Melissa, the girl everyone wanted to protect, but no one really knew. Off camera, the set was its own small universe, half wholesome family, half high-pressure machine. The long days blurred together. The emotional scenes left her exhausted, and every time she stumbled, she felt the weight of a network's expectations pressing down. Yet she delivered, week after week. That tiny girl carried a television empire on her shoulders, and as her fame grew, so did the attention, interviews, magazine covers, and the relentless message that she had to stay perfect. But fame has a way of whispering lies. It tells you you're special, and then makes you prove it every single day. Melissa began to notice that behind every starlet's smile was a story of struggle, a quiet suffering that the cameras never caught, and she would soon meet one of the few people who understood that duality completely. Patty Duke, the actress who had lived both the triumph and the tragedy of child stardom. When the two finally crossed paths years later, it would be like watching the past collide with the future. One woman who had survived Hollywood's darkest storms, and another just beginning to feel the thunder. I didn't know it then, Melissa would later say, but Patty Duke showed me what could happen when the world loves you a little too much, and you start to forget who you are. That meeting would mark the beginning of one of the most powerful and painful revelations of Melissa Gilbert's life. It was 1979. Melissa Gilbert was just 15. She had already become one of the most recognizable faces in America, but inside, she was still trying to understand who she was without the cameras. Then came a new role that would test her in ways she never expected. A television remake of The Miracle Worker. She would play Helen Keller, the young deaf and blind girl whose story had moved generations. And her teacher, mentor, and co-star, none other than Patty Duke, a woman whose name carried both glory and rumor throughout Hollywood. For Melissa, it felt like destiny. Patty Duke had once played Helen Keller herself in the 1962 film version, a performance that won her an Academy Award and turned her into a legend before she was even 20. Now, years later, Patty would play Anne Sullivan, Helen's teacher, stepping into the opposite side of the story she had once lived. When Melissa first walked onto set, she could feel Patty's energy before she even saw her. The air seemed to shift, electric, unpredictable. Patty Duke wasn't the kind of actress who just entered a room. She arrived. Melissa remembered that first handshake. Patty's eyes, sharp, almost too sharp, scanned her like she could see straight through her. And for a moment, Melissa felt like the little girl again, the child star meeting the woman she might one day become. But Patty Duke wasn't just a star, she was a survivor. By then, she had already lived a lifetime of extremes, explosive success, heartbreaking breakdowns, and the constant battle of living with bipolar disorder, a condition few people even understood back then. Still, on set, Patty was mesmerizing. When the cameras rolled, she was raw, fierce, unstoppable. Her performances were so real, Melissa once said it felt like standing too close to lightning. There were days Patty would explode with emotion, yelling, crying, laughing, sometimes all in the same scene. To the young Melissa, it was overwhelming. She didn't yet realize that behind that fire was a woman desperately trying to stay in control of her own mind. And yet, something about Patty drew her in. She wasn't fake, she wasn't polished. She was human, painfully, beautifully human. Patty became a strange kind of mirror, the reflection of what fame could give you and what it could take away. I admired her, Melissa later said, but I also feared what I saw in her, because I knew, deep down, it could happen to me too. That realization would stay buried in Melissa for years, until life forced her to face it again. As filming went on, Melissa Gilbert began to notice things about Patty Duke that didn't make sense: sudden mood changes, long silences between takes, moments of fierce joy followed by complete withdrawal. One minute, Patty was everyone's best friend. The next, she'd vanish into her dressing room, the door closed tight. At 15, Melissa didn't understand what she was witnessing. She thought maybe Patty was just temperamental, the way Hollywood often labeled complicated women. But as she got older, she realized what she had been seeing was a woman fighting a private war, one that fame, money, and applause could never cure. Patty Duke's life had never been easy. She had been thrust into the spotlight as a child, manipulated by controlling managers, and pushed into an industry that devoured innocence for ratings. Behind every award and smile was trauma, years of abuse, exploitation, and untreated mental illness. To the world, she was strong. To herself, she was barely holding on. Melissa watched all of it. The brilliance, the breakdowns, the quiet moments between takes where Patty seemed to stare at nothing for just a little too long. It scared her, but it also changed her. For the first time, Melissa saw the truth behind Hollywood's golden curtain, that many of its brightest stars were burning out from the inside. Years later, Melissa admitted, "We thought she was just intense, but she was in pain. Real pain. And nobody was helping her." It would take decades before Melissa fully understood what she had witnessed, because her own life would begin to mirror Patty's in haunting ways. As Melissa grew up, she faced her own battles: failed marriages, addiction, the pressures of public life, and the impossible demand to always look perfect. She began to realize that what she had seen in Patty Duke wasn't just mental illness, it was the cost of survival in a business that chews people up and sells their pain as entertainment. And when Patty finally went public years later, bravely sharing her diagnosis of bipolar disorder, Melissa said it gave her the courage to speak about her own struggles, without shame. "Patty Duke taught me that it's okay to be broken," Melissa confessed, "because broken people still shine, sometimes even brighter." That truth would become a turning point in her life, a lesson she would carry for decades until, at 61, she finally sat down and told the world everything. Everything she saw, everything she learned, everything Hollywood didn't want her to say. By the late 1980s, Melissa Gilbert was no longer the little girl America adored. She was a woman trying to find herself in a world that had already decided who she was supposed to be. The fame that had once felt magical now felt like a cage. The interviews, the endless scrutiny, the pressure to stay perfect, it all began to eat at her. Behind closed doors, Melissa was struggling. She dealt with heartbreak, with addiction, with the silent ache of someone who had lived too long under the weight of expectation. "I was smiling for cameras," she later admitted, "but I was falling apart when the lights went off." And through it all, she couldn't stop thinking about Patty Duke. By this time, Patty had already stepped away from the chaos of young Hollywood. She had gone public with something almost no celebrity dared to talk about: mental illness. In 1982, Patty Duke released her autobiography, Call Me Anna, revealing that she had lived with bipolar disorder her entire life. The world was stunned. Back then, admitting you had a mental health condition could end your career. But Patty didn't care. She wasn't just reclaiming her life, she was rewriting what it meant to be human in an industry built on illusion. To Melissa, it was a revelation. The woman she had once seen as unstable now appeared as something entirely different, courageous. Patty Duke wasn't falling apart. She was breaking free. And for Melissa, that realization hit like lightning. All those moments on set suddenly made sense. The outbursts, the exhaustion, the wild swings between joy and despair. Patty wasn't a diva. She was fighting for her life. She wasn't dangerous, Melissa said later. She was brave. She faced the thing everyone else was too afraid to name. That confession, decades later, would change everything. Because Melissa saw herself in Patty's struggle. She saw the same anxiety, the same fragile line between strength and collapse, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit that maybe she too was still healing from the trauma of growing up on display. It wasn't fame that broke her. It was pretending that it hadn't. When Melissa Gilbert turned 61, she did something she had never done before. She stopped hiding. No makeup, no filters, no carefully crafted Little House nostalgia. Just Melissa. Raw, unedited, and finally free from the Hollywood mask she had worn since childhood. In interviews and memoirs, she began to speak openly, not just about her own struggles, but about the painful beauty of Patty Duke's legacy. "Patty taught me that surviving doesn't mean being perfect," she said softly. "It means being honest." For years, Hollywood had built walls around pain, pretending that glamour could erase trauma. But Melissa was tearing those walls down, brick by brick. She spoke about the addiction, the failed marriages, the depression, and the exhausting lie of being America's sweetheart. But what truly shook people was how she talked about Patty Duke. Not as a scandal, but as a hero. A woman who lived through madness, manipulation, and the cruelty of fame, yet somehow found her way back to peace. Patty Duke passed away in 2016. And when Melissa Gilbert spoke about her after her death, her voice broke, not from grief alone, but from understanding. "She showed me that broken doesn't mean weak. It means real. And real is the bravest thing you can be." At 61, Melissa finally told the truth the world never heard. That behind every perfect childhood star was a child who just wanted to be loved, not watched. That Patty Duke was not just a cautionary tale, she was a warning wrapped in wisdom. A map for anyone who ever got lost chasing fame. And that Melissa Gilbert, after all the fame, the pain, and the endless pretending, had finally found peace, not by escaping her past, but by embracing it. She didn't just tell Patty Duke's story, she finished it. Because the truth isn't what Hollywood shows you. The truth is what survives after the lights go out. There's a moment, quiet, ordinary, when Melissa Gilbert realized she didn't owe Hollywood anything anymore. No more perfect smiles. No more red carpets. No more pretending that the spotlight was a home. She was done. After decades of living under the camera's glare, she walked away from Los Angeles, the city that had given her everything and taken even more. She packed up her life and moved to a small cabin in the Catskill Mountains of New York with her husband, actor Timothy Busfield. No paparazzi, no scripts, no makeup trailers, just trees, silence, and the rare kind of peace you can only find after you've lost yourself completely. For the first time since she was a child, Melissa wasn't performing. She was breathing. "I didn't want to be the girl from Little House anymore," she said. "I wanted to be the woman I was supposed to become." The transformation was shocking to fans. She stopped dyeing her hair, stopped chasing youth, stopped apologizing for growing older in an industry terrified of age. She called it freedom. But behind that calm exterior, something deeper was happening. A kind of spiritual untangling. Because when she left Hollywood, she wasn't just leaving fame. She was leaving pain. The ghost of the little girl who had always been told to smile, even when her world was falling apart. In the mountains, Melissa began to rebuild. Not her career, but herself. She learned how to grow food, how to live simply, how to listen to silence without running from it. And in that silence, she started to hear something she hadn't heard in decades. Her own voice. For so long, she said, I thought I had to stay perfect to matter. But Patty taught me that truth matters more than perfection. It was as if Patty Duke's courage had echoed across time, reaching her former co-star in the stillness of the woods, reminding her that healing doesn't happen under lights. It happens in the dark, when you finally stop pretending. And for Melissa, that darkness wasn't scary anymore. It was sacred. At 61, Melissa Gilbert is no longer chasing roles. She's chasing meaning. She speaks softly now, not like a celebrity, but like someone who's seen behind the curtain and decided she'd rather tell the truth than sell the dream. Fame doesn't heal you, she said in one interview. It hides you. And that truth, sharp, simple, undeniable, became her legacy. Because when Melissa finally told the world about Patty Duke, it wasn't a scandal, it was a confession. A love letter to survival. She talked about Patty not as a fallen star, but as a woman who fought back, who used her pain to help others understand theirs. And in doing so, Melissa carried that torch forward, becoming in her own quiet way, the kind of mentor Patty once was to her. She began to advocate for authenticity, mental health awareness, and aging without shame. She reminded her audience, the same people who had once watched her grow up on TV, that real life doesn't end when the fame fades. Sometimes, that's when it finally begins. Her eyes, once wide with the fear of a child actress trying to survive, now reflect something different. Peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you stop living for applause. Patty Duke showed me that truth can save you, Melissa said, even if it takes you 60 years to tell it. And that's the twist no one saw coming. The girl who once embodied innocence became the woman who redefined strength. The student learned from the teacher and finished the story she started as a child. In the end, both Patty Duke and Melissa Gilbert left behind more than fame. They left a map for survival, one written in courage, honesty, and the unglamorous art of simply being real. Because in a world built on pretending, telling the truth is the most radical thing you can do. And that, more than any award, more than any role, is what Melissa Gilbert will be remembered for. I survived Hollywood, she said, but more importantly, I survived myself. Soft music fades, camera pulls back, the mountains, the quiet, the light through the trees. Narrator. In the end, it wasn't fame that made her story unforgettable. It was truth, the kind of truth that never needs a spotlight to shine. Every story in Hollywood has a shadow, the part that never makes it into the headlines. For Melissa Gilbert, that shadow was reflection. She had spent decades looking at herself through the eyes of others, directors, fans, critics, all projecting what they wanted her to be. The innocent pioneer girl, the sweetheart, the survivor. But when she spoke about Patty Duke, she was finally talking to her own reflection. I think Patty saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, she once admitted. She saw how fragile fame can make a person, how it can lift you up and destroy you at the same time. And that realization hit her like a second coming of truth. Because Patty's story, wild, brilliant, messy, and raw, had been the mirror that showed Melissa what she might become if she didn't start choosing herself. It wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a warning. Patty had been a young girl, thrust into fame, praised, controlled, and misunderstood. And the cost was nearly everything. And though Melissa's path looked brighter from the outside, the machinery was the same. Pressure, image, survival. That's the dark secret of child stardom. It doesn't end when you grow up. It just hides in new disguises. In interviews, Melissa revealed that when she finally began to speak about Patty's struggles, the bipolar disorder, the loneliness, the loss of identity, she was also speaking about herself. The blurred lines between their lives were haunting. Two women, two timelines, same industry, same expectations, same ghosts. And yet one difference changed everything. Patty Duke didn't always get the peace she deserved. Melissa Gilbert was determined to. Patty showed me the danger of silence, she said. If you don't tell your own story, someone else will. That became her new mission, not just to live, but to reclaim her narrative before anyone else could twist it. In a world addicted to perfection, she chose honesty. In a culture obsessed with fame, she chose peace, and that's when she truly became free. Not from Hollywood, but from the weight of pretending she was okay. At 61, Melissa Gilbert no longer needs the world's applause, because she's finally found her own voice, echoing louder than the noise of fame. When she talks about Patty Duke now, there's no gossip in her tone, no sensationalism, just reverence. She speaks as someone who's seen what happens when the spotlight burns too long and too hot, and still dares to stand in the glow, unashamed. Patty taught me that the truth is never ugly, Melissa said softly. The lies are. And that one line, simple, quiet but cutting, defines her legacy. She's not just the girl from Little House on the Prairie anymore. She's the woman who grew up, broke down, healed, and came back to tell the world what the price of silence really is. Her truth isn't neat or rehearsed. It trembles, it bleeds, it feels. And that's why people listen. Because somewhere out there, someone hears her voice and realizes they're not alone. Someone hears her talk about Patty's strength and finds their own. Someone hears her say, our struggles don't define us, they shape us, and finally believes it. In the end, the story of Melissa Gilbert and Patty Duke isn't about Hollywood, it's about humanity. Two women, decades apart, connected by pain, courage, and the relentless search for self-acceptance. And maybe that's why, even now, their names still echo through time. Not because they were stars, but because they were real. Narrator. Two actresses. Two generations. One truth. That fame fades, but honesty survives. The music swells. Archival clips fade into quiet black. The voiceover softens. Melissa Gilbert didn't just tell the truth about Patty Duke. She told the truth about all of us. The parts we hide, the pain we bury, and the strength we only find when the spotlight finally fades. There's a strange thing that happens when a person tells the truth. The world stops listening to the noise and starts listening to you. For Melissa Gilbert, that moment came quietly, without fanfare. No cameras flashing, no red carpet interviews. Just a woman, 61 years old, finally speaking words that had been sitting on her chest for a lifetime. I used to be afraid of the truth, she said, because once you tell it, you can't hide anymore. But hiding is what had nearly broken her. For years she'd played roles, not just on screen but in her own life. The strong woman, the survivor, the one who had it all together. But inside, she was unraveling, carrying wounds the world never saw. And in Patty Duke's story, she saw the same pattern, the same Hollywood silence that swallows pain and spits out headlines. Patty had been the first to break that silence, to speak openly about her bipolar disorder in a time when mental illness was still a taboo subject. She risked her reputation to save others. And now, decades later, Melissa realized she had inherited that courage. Patty showed me that truth isn't something you whisper, she said. It's something you stand on. That's when Melissa started using her platform differently. She stopped chasing comebacks and started creating conversations. She talked about aging in Hollywood, the illusion of perfection, and the freedom of authenticity. She wasn't afraid to show wrinkles, to admit mistakes, to laugh at herself. And people noticed. Because in a culture addicted to filters and facades, her honesty felt dangerous. It was the kind of danger that draws you in, not because it's scandalous, but because it's real. Melissa's truth wasn't just about Patty Duke anymore. It was about every woman who's ever been told to smile when she's breaking, to stay quiet when she's angry, or to stay young when she's simply tired. The documentary moment here, the shot that lingers, is her face. No makeup, no performance, just clarity. A woman who's finally free of pretending. We've all got a little Patty in us, she said, and that's not a tragedy. It's proof that we're human. In the end, what Melissa Gilbert said about Patty Duke wasn't gossip, it was legacy. Two lives, decades apart, but woven together by pain, resilience, and an unspoken sisterhood that only survivors of fame can understand. Hollywood loves to celebrate youth, beauty, and perfection, but it rarely honors honesty. Melissa changed that. She didn't expose a secret, she revealed a truth, one that every actor, every woman, and every human being could recognize. Because when she spoke about Patty, she wasn't just talking about a friend. She was talking about herself. And, in a way, she was talking about all of us. How we carry our scars, how we hide them, and how healing begins when we stop pretending they don't exist. I used to think survival meant keeping my pain private, Melissa said in one interview, but I learned that survival means sharing it. Because that's how we connect. It's a truth Patty Duke would have loved. Today, Melissa Gilbert's legacy isn't built on awards or fame. It's built on truth, on the power of saying, "This happened to me, and I'm still here." She's turned her pain into purpose, her past into perspective, and her silence into something louder than applause, authenticity. As the camera fades, we see her walking through her garden in upstate New York. Gray hair glinting in the afternoon sun, her hands covered in dirt, her smile unguarded. The narration slows. Narrator. There was once a girl who played innocence on television. And there was once a woman who found it again, not in fame, but in forgiveness. The music swells, soft piano, a hint of nostalgia. Melissa Gilbert told the truth about Patty Duke. But what she really did was tell the truth about herself. And in that truth, she found something far greater than fame. She found peace. The screen fades to black. Then, one final quote appears. Our struggles don't define us. They shape us. And if we have the courage to share them, maybe we can help someone else feel less alone. Melissa Gilbert. Fame is a strange kind of ghost. It never really dies. It lingers, whispering through old interviews, reruns, and fan memories that never fade. For Melissa Gilbert, fame had once been everything. It gave her identity, purpose, validation. It made her a household name, America's little girl. But fame also haunted her. It was there in every headline that measured her worth by her looks. It was there in every rumor that questioned her marriages, her body, her choices. And it was there every time she looked in the mirror and wondered if the world still cared. Hollywood doesn't tell you when it's done with you, she once said. It just stops calling. That silence, that vanishing, can destroy a person. It's the part of fame nobody talks about. But Melissa learned something profound in that silence. When the world stops watching, you finally see yourself clearly. She began to understand what Patty Duke must have felt when her career slowed, when the applause dimmed, when the same people who once praised her suddenly forgot her name. Patty had lived and died under the gaze of an industry that adored her talent but ignored her pain. Melissa refused to let that happen to her. I watched Patty lose herself to fame, she said, and I promised myself I wouldn't let it happen again, not to me, so she stopped chasing it, stopped needing it. And that's when something almost magical happened. She started to feel alive again. She realized that fame had never been the point. It was always the story that mattered. And the story, hers, Patty's, all of ours, is never about how bright you shine, but how long you survive once the lights go out. Patty taught me that the real performance begins when the curtain falls, Melissa said quietly. That's when you find out who you really are. And that's what makes her story unforgettable. Not that she was famous, but that she found freedom after fame. When Melissa Gilbert finally spoke her truth about Patty Duke, it wasn't just a tribute, it was an awakening. She wasn't confessing. She was passing the torch. Patty's bravery in talking about her struggles with mental illness, her chaotic upbringing, and her turbulent life in Hollywood had changed the conversation for a generation. And now, decades later, Melissa was doing the same, for a new one. But she did it in her own way. Softly, honestly, without shame. Patty made it okay to be broken, Melissa said. She showed us that being human is not a weakness. It's a superpower. That's the kind of truth that doesn't go viral for a day. It lasts for decades. Because deep down, everyone watching knows exactly what she means. Everyone has a story they've been too afraid to tell. And when Melissa finally told hers, when she opened up about addiction, self-doubt, loss, and rediscovery, she didn't just free herself. She freed everyone listening. She showed that life after fame can be more beautiful than anything fame ever gave. That peace can be louder than applause. That honesty can be more powerful than perfection. Now, when people see Melissa Gilbert, they don't just see Half Pint from Little House on the Prairie. They see a woman who looked straight into Hollywood's darkest corners and walked out with her soul intact. She's proof that you can lose everything the world values and still find what truly matters. Narrator. Patty Duke taught her how to survive the storm. Melissa Gilbert taught the rest of us how to live after it. And maybe that's why, even now, her voice still resonates. Not because she said something shocking, but because she said something real. At 61, she said, I finally learned that the truth doesn't destroy you. It saves you. The screen fades to black. Soft piano music rises. Archival clips of Patty Duke and Melissa Gilbert flash in slow motion. Laughter, tears, moments frozen in time. Narrator, final line. Two women, two generations. One truth, that no matter how bright the spotlight burns, it's the honesty that outlives the fame. And now, the story comes full circle. Melissa Gilbert, once America's little girl on Little House on the Prairie, stands today not just as an actress, but as a testament to the power of honesty, resilience, and survival. She has lived a life that most could never imagine, from the dizzying heights of fame to the private struggles that threatened to consume her. I grew up in the spotlight, but it didn't show the real me, Melissa said. It only showed what the world wanted to see. Yet, in the shadows of that world, she found something stronger than fame. Truth. And that truth is inseparable from Patty Duke, the woman who lived fiercely, broke barriers, and revealed the hidden battles behind Hollywood's golden veneer. Patty wasn't perfect. She wasn't untouchable. She was human. And that humanity inspired Melissa to survive, to speak, and to reclaim her story. Watching Patty fight, watching her tell her story, gave me courage I didn't know I had. Melissa reflected. She taught me that bravery isn't about applause. It's about standing up for yourself, even when no one is watching. Now, at 61, Melissa is free from Hollywood's expectations. She lives quietly, authentically, fully, in small towns, in gardens, in kitchens, and in her writing. Her life is measured not by ratings or awards, but by the moments she chooses to be real, the connections she makes, and the truth she dares to speak. And that's what makes the story unforgettable. It's not about stardom. It's about survival. It's about women passing wisdom across generations. It's about finding your voice when the world told you to stay silent. Patty Duke gave me a map, Melissa said, her voice steady and soft. And at last I've learned how to follow it. In telling her truth, Melissa honors not just her own journey, but Patty's legacy, and the countless others whose stories remain untold. It's a lesson for everyone. Fame fades. People forget. Applause dies. But honesty, courage, and vulnerability, those are eternal. Narrator, final lines, cinematic and slow. Two women. Two lives intertwined by fame, struggle, and survival. One lesson, that the truths we finally dare to tell are the ones that outlive the spotlight. And in that truth, we find not just ourselves, but each other. The screen slowly fades to black. A soft wind, a piano note, and then silence. The last thing the viewer sees is a quote on the screen. Our struggles don't define us. They shape us. And if we have the courage to share them, maybe we can help someone else feel less alone. Melissa Gilbert. The music swells, gentle but lingering, leaving the audience in quiet awe. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of its lasting echo.